Good morning. Today we are going to talk about the chapter The Mauryan Empire. Let's see the subheadings of the Great Mauryan Empire. Alexander's invasion, effects of Alexander's invasion, sources to reconstruct the age of Mauryas. In that we have literary sources, archaeological sources. The next one is Chandragupta Maurya. Topics covered here are his conquests, invasion of Seleucus Nicator, greatness of Chandragupta Maurya, King Bindusara, King Ashoka. In that, the Kalinga War, its consequences. The continuation of the subheadings are effects of Ashoka Empire, pan-Indian character of the empire, Mauryan administration. The topics covered here are the king, the council of ministers, the network of spies, sources of revenue, provincial administration, district administration and other officials, administration of justice, peace and good order. Next one is the architecture. The Dhamma, fundamental principles of Dhamma, means adopted for propagation of the Dhamma and spread of Buddhism, Ashoka's place in the history, decline of the Mauryan Empire. The foundation of the Mauryan Empire was a unique event in Indian history. Let's begin with Alexander's invasion. Alexander, the king of Macedonia, after consolidating his victory in Persia, turned towards India. In 326 BC, he entered northwest India. The first state to be reached after crossing the river Indus was Taxila, whose ruler could not muster sufficient strength to resist the invading army. He therefore solicited Alexander's friendship and offered rich presents to him. Beyond Jhelum lay another kingdom ruled by Paurava called Porus by Greek historians. King Porus fought bravely, but he was seriously wounded and taken prisoner. Alexander admired his courage and gave him back his kingdom and made him his friend and ally. Alexander planned to march forward and cross the Chenab and the Ravi rivers and advanced up to the Bias. His soldiers had heard that territory beyond Bias was ruled by mighty Nanda emperor, who could not be defeated easily. They refused to go any further. Alexander began his return journey. That was the year 325 BC. A year or so later, he died at Babylon in modern Iraq. Effects of Alexander's invasion. Alexander had appointed a few satraps governors for the regions conquered by him. In about 7 years' time, many traces of Greek authority had disappeared from India after retreat of Alexander from India. But its indirect results were many. The routes of communication with the West, both by land and the sea, were thrown open in a manner that had never happened before. The writings of Alexander's generals and companions became an important source of information about the Mauryas. Of this, the most important is the account of Megasthenes, who visited the court of Chandragupta and stayed for some time at Patliputra. Many Greeks had settled in the northwest region of India. As a result, Indian art and culture came to be increasingly influenced by Greco-Roman culture. The Greek technique left its mark on the Gandhara school of art. The Greek invasion made kingdoms of northwest weak. This paved the way for the rise and growth of the Mauryan Empire. Sources to reconstruct the age of the Mauryas. Literary sources. Indica, which is written by Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador to Patliputra. He lived at the Mauryan capital for about 5 years. From his book, we get a lot of information about the organization of the Mauryan army, the administration of Patliputra, the growth in the economy, especially agriculture, the customs and religion of the people. However, the original Indica written by Megasthenes was lost. This was supported by other Greek writers such as Strato, Plutarch, and Justin. Arthashastra. The book Arthashastra is attributed to Kautilya or Chanakya It contains about 6,000 verses divided into 15 sections. It provides details of the art of administration, duties of the king, functions of ministers, and organization of civil service. It also deals with high-level diplomacy and relations between various states. Kautilya's ideal state should provide relief to the poor, the orphans, the old, and the infirm. Other works. The Vayu Purana and Matsya Purana gives list of rulers of different dynasties, Mauryas being one of them. Vishakadatta Mudra Rakshasa is considered to be the best historical drama in the whole of Sanskrit literature. It throws light on the position of Nandas and the activities of Chandragupta Maurya and Chanakya. It also gives us an idea of social life of people in those days. Archaeological sources. Ashokan edicts. An edict means an official order or proclamation. Ashoka's edicts can be broadly divided into two classes, those engraved on rocks and those incised on the pillars of the stone. They are the most reliable source of information. Rock edicts. A series of 14 rock edicts were discovered at various places across India. They prescribe following rules: non-violence or abstention from killing of living beings, truthfulness, obedience to parents and elders, respect towards the teachers. Conquest of Kalinga was an important event of Ashoka's reign. The horrors of the war awakened in Ashoka's heart the feelings of profound sorrow. Inscriptions on pillars. The pillars are the best specimens of Mauryan architecture. The art critics have nothing but admiration for those pillars. Besides being very beautiful, pillars contain edicts of Ashoka. Sanchi Stupa. A stupa is a dome-like structure made of stone or bricks. The purpose of a stupa was to commemorate a sacred spot or a particular event, or to enshrine the relics of Buddha or those of Buddha's saint. The great stupa at Sanchi near Vidisha in Madhya Pradesh is believed to have been originally built by Ashoka in 3rd century BC. The gateways of Sanchi stupa are lavishly covered with magnificent sculptures which depict the episodes from Buddha's life and from Jataka tales. Chandragupta Maurya, 324 to 300 BC. Magadha was being ruled by Nandas at this time. The Nanda dynasty produced 9 kings who ruled for about a century. The last of them was Dhanananda, whose treasury was full and army mighty, but who was not at all popular. He was disliked by his subjects. Vishnugupta, better known as Chanakya or Kautilya, was learned Brahmin of Taxila. He had gone to Pataliputra, where he was humiliated by the Nanda king. On his way back to Taxila, he met young Chandragupta, whose mother probably belonged to the Maurya clan of eastern India. Seeing the signs of greatness in the boy, Chanakya took him to his native town of Taxila. There he gave him a thorough education in the arts of war and government. In this slide, we'll see some other topics on Chandragupta Maurya. His conquests. The unstable state of affairs in Punjab provided Chandragupta with an opportunity to conquer one kingdom after another. He soon made himself the master of West Punjab and Sindh. Chandragupta's next target was Magadha. He was able to uproot the Nanda dynasty and took control of their rich and powerful kingdom, Magadha. The clever diplomacy of Kautilya played a no less prominent part in it than the bravery and military skill of Chandragupta. Invasion of Seleucus Nicator. Chandragupta expanded the territories of his empire. The territories west of Indus were ruled by Greek king Seleucus. He wanted to recover the Greek conquests in India. He crossed the Indus and began to march victoriously through the Punjab. The Mauryan armies rushed to the northwest and inflicted a crushing defeat on him. Seleucus was forced to retire and had to purchase peace by ceding to Chandragupta. Chandragupta presented him with 500 war elephants, and it is believed that he married Princess Helen, daughter of Seleucus. Greece maintained friendly relations and sent Megasthenes as his ambassador. The greatness of the Chandragupta Maurya. Chandragupta has been described as the first historical emperor of India. His empire extended up to Mysore in the south and Kabul in the northwest. It stretched from Saurashtra in the west up to Bengal in the east. According to the Jain tradition, Chandragupta renounced princely life and settled down at a place Shravan in southern India. There is a hill nearby called Chandragiri which seems to have been named after him. King Bindusara 300 to 273 BC. Chandragupta was succeeded by his son Bindusara. He reigned for 27 years. Very little is known of him from literary sources, nor is any monument or inscription of his time known. But it is probable that he continued his father's career of conquest within the borders of India. Early Tamil poets mention Mauryan chariots racing across the land. Therefore, some scholars have suggested that annexation of Deccan was effected during Bindusara's reign. Greek historians tell us that friendly relations between India and Greek powers continued unbroken throughout the reign of Bindusara. Accordingly, Megasthenes was replaced by Demachus as an ambassador to the Mauryan court. King Ashoka 273 to 232 BC. Ashoka was the third and the most enlightened ruler of the Mauryan dynasty. He reigned in the 3rd century BC. As a young prince, Ashoka had the charge of Ujjain as its viceroy or governor. When revolt took place in Taxila during the reign of King Bindusara, Ashoka was sent there to crush it. He was one of the several sons and was selected as Yuvaraja or crown prince on account of his ability for the imperial throne. The Kalinga War. Ashoka led for a few years the life of an ordinary monarch. It was in the year 261 BC that Ashoka decided to add Kalinga, present-day Odisha, to his already vast domains. The opposition offered to this invasion was so stiff that the conquest involved innumerable destruction. Nearly 150,000 persons were carried into captivity, 1 lakh were slain, and that many times that number from famine and other calamities. Its consequences. The Kalinga War was the turning point of Ashoka's career. All his misery awakened in his heart the feelings of profound sorrow and regret. The war drum was silenced forever. From that time onwards, Ashoka preached nothing but peace. He became follower of Lord Buddha and employed unlimited power and resources in teaching and propagation of an ethical system which is called the Dhamma, the law of piety. With the death of Ashoka, the Mauryan dynasty ceased to be a political force, though later rulers continued little more than 50 years. Extent of Ashoka's empire, pan-Indian character of the empire. Ashokan inscriptions are a reliable guide to the extent of Mauryan empire. Ashoka's empire extended up to Hindu Kush mountains in the northern west. It included the parts of Indus Valley, Kashmir, the foothills of Nepal, and the entire Ganga delta. Tamralipti and modern Tamluk was an important port on the Bengal coast from where ships sailed for Burma and Sri Lanka. In the south, the empire was extended as far as Mysore. Though the northwest, the Mauryas maintained close relations with Khotan in Central Asia. Ashoka was on friendly terms with the states of southernmost India, the Cholas, the Pandyas, and the Keralaputras. He sent the missions to the neighboring kingdoms in the West Asia, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. The foregoing description suggests that pan-Indian or subcontinental character of the Mauryan Empire. Ashoka ruled over a large part of the Indian subcontinent. There were 3 main advantages of the pan-Indian character of Ashokan Empire. First, it resulted in the disappearance of small states. Second, it enabled the rulers face foreign invasions successfully. Third, it facilitated trade and commerce with frontier towns as well as the Middle Eastern and the Greek cities. Mauryan Administration. From Kautilya's Ardhashastra, we gain a lot of knowledge about Mauryan administration and character of the empire. Ashokan inscriptions tell us about the policies of his government. The king. The king was the supreme head of the state and had military, judicial, and executive powers. He also had the power to enact laws. Kautilya divided the king's day into 8 parts and to take care of people's welfare, social order, and military actions. Council of Ministers. The king had a council of ministers called Mantri Parishad to advise him. They were small in number but very influential. At times, the Mantri Parishad could act as a check on the king's powers. The ministers definitely advised the king in the task of choosing governors, general of the army, treasurer of the state, chief magistrate, and other high officials. A network of spies. The Mauryan state made extensive use of reporters and spies to keep the emperor well informed about his opponents and their activities. Megasthenes called these spies as overseers. Kautilya called them the Guda Purushas, that is, the secret agents. They reported to the king important matters concerning the army, the state, and the conduct of his officers. Let's see the other parts of the Mauryan administration. Sources of revenue. Arthashastra provides a detailed list of sources of revenue which include land revenue from mines and forests, revenue from manufactured goods of various kinds, tolls payable for using bridges and roads, fines and license fee. Kautilya said that the taxes must be reasonable and these taxes collected should be spent on public works and salaries for the large army. Provincial Administration. Next to the emperor ranked the governors in charge of provinces of the empire. The Ashokan inscriptions mention 4 such governors posted at Taxila, that is northern province, Ujjain, western province, Tosali, eastern province, Suvarnagiri, southern province. The governors had their ministers and also had the power to appoint a few officials. The smaller provinces were under officials called Pradeshakas in the Ashokan edicts. District administration and other officials. Provinces were subdivided into districts for the purpose of administration. Ashokan inscriptions refer to 3 classes of high officials, namely the Rajukas, Yuktas, and Mahamatras. The Rajukas were probably in charge of districts and corresponded to the district magistrate of the present day. They managed the state property and kept law and order in the district. The Yukta was probably the district treasury officers who collected revenues and kept accounts. The Mahamatras were heads of special departments. Ashoka created a new class of Mahamatras, that is Dhamma Mahamatras, who promoted Dhamma and looked after the general happiness and welfare of the people. The city administration. Arthashastra mentions that the Nagaraka, who functioned as the city superintendent or a magistrate, with a number of officers assisting him. The duties of Nagaraka, according to Kautilya, were the provision of water to the city dwellers, the maintenance of public roads and public buildings. Megasthenes, on the other hand, gives a more elaborate system of city administration. There were 6 boards which acted together in general matters like maintenance of public buildings, fire protection, and care of wells and temples. Let's see the remaining part of the Mauryan administration. Administration of justice. Megasthenes attests to the efficient administration of the criminal law. Serious offences visited with the death penalty. Lighter crimes were punished by cutting off the nose or shaving of the offender's hair, a penalty that made one feel ashamed. Evasion of taxes on goods sold or of municipal cess was regarded as a serious offence. Laws concerned with crimes were very severe and punishments were exceptionally harsh. Peace and good order. Peace and contentment prevailed throughout the empire. Theft was a rare occurrence, although houses were usually left unguarded. Such a situation was the result of mainly 3 factors: the general honesty of the people, efficient administration of the criminal law, and the Mauryan economy based on productive agriculture and lucrative business and trade. Let's see the productive agriculture. Megasthenes attests to the fertility of the soil due to the major irrigation works such as the dam on the Sudarshan Lake at Girnar. According to Arthashastra, the amount of tax would depend on the irrigation facilities available to the cultivators and could range from 1/3 to 1/6 of the land produce. Lucrative trade. Trade was carried on both by land and by waterways. The royal highway ran from the region nearby Taxila to Patliputra. From the port of Tamralipti, the ships sailed for the east coast, Sri Lanka, Burma. The Buddhist literature refers to the sea voyages from Bharuch, Gujarat to Babylon. Architecture. We have already seen the style, layout, and artistic or decorative features of the Sanchi Stupa. Let's see the examples of Mauryan architecture. Remains of royal palace and the capital city of Patliputra, Ashokan pillars and stupas, rock-cut chaitya caves of Barbar Hills near Gaya, some Yaksha and Yakshini figures that have been found near Mathura and Patna. The Yakshinis are the nymphs in Indian mythology. The Dhamma, the horrors of a single war convinced Ashoka that the chiefest conquest is the conquest of right and not of might. Fundamental principles of Dhamma. The Prakrit word Dhamma and the Sanskrit word Dharma have the same meaning. Dharma never meant exactly religion. Let's see the fundamental principles of Dhamma: purity of domestic life and truthfulness, toleration, that is not to speak evil of other religious faith, ahimsa, that is sanctity of life, and true ceremonial, which is kindness to living creatures and liberality to ascetics and Brahmins. Means adopted for the propagation of Dhamma and spread of Buddhism. Ashoka practiced what he preached. He gave up royal hunt and also stopped the killing of living creatures for the delicacies of royal kitchen. He followed a policy of religious tolerance and made donations to the Brahmins. Officers of the state were required to tell people about their duties. Ashoka created a special class of officers called Dhamma Mahamatras, who were charged with duty of enforcing the moral code and looking after the welfare of the people. Ashokan edicts are mainly religious in character. They require people to cultivate purity of life, to tolerant to the other religious faith, to abstain from killing or injuring animals. Royal missionaries were sent to all frontiers of the empire and to Sri Lanka, Syria, Egypt, and Macedonia for the propagation of Dhamma and the spread of Buddhism. Ashoka's place in the history. Ashoka was one of the greatest kings in the history of the world. He was inspired by the zeal of a religious missionary. At the same time, he never forgot that he was a king and never neglected his kingdom or his princely duties. He practiced what he preached. His greatness lay in the fact that he was liberal and generous to those who had different faith. In his seventh pillar edict, he orders the Dhamma Mahamatras to look after the Brahmins and Ajivikas. During his pilgrimage to Buddhist places, he made generous donations to Brahmins and ascetics of religious sects. Decline of the Mauryan Empire. Let's see the several reasons why the empire broke up. The empire was very vast. It needed a strong hand to hold it together, but Ashoka's successors were weak. The enormous expenditure on the army and payment to the state officials created a financial crisis for the empire. It seems that the later kings failed to collect taxes from the people. The chiefs of Kalinga and southern provinces revolted. They freed themselves from the control of the Mauryas. Ashoka's successors could not pay attention to safeguarding the northwestern frontier. The Greek kings began to invade the northwestern India. It was under these circumstances that Brihadra, the last Mauryan ruler, was killed by Mauryan general Pushyamitra Sangha. It might have taken place in the year 187 BC. That was the end of the Mauryan Empire.